besides the various lobes, left frontal lobe, for example, left parietal lobe, left occipital lobe, left temporal lobe. You would have the left lateral fissure in here. You can see the left central sulcus where I'm running my thumbnail, and the left central sulcus. Anterior to that is the left precentral gyrus, and here behind it, the left postcentral gyrus. Those colors there indicate the cortex. So this cortex here would be the primary somatic motor cortex that controls skeletal muscles on the right side of the body. There's the primary somatic motor cortex that controls skeletal muscles on the left side of the body. And behind it, the postcentral gyrus, which is part of the parietal lobe, we've got the primary somatic sensory cortex, which receives all of the sensory pathways involved with variations on touch. Touch, pressure, vibration, proprioception, they all come in to the cortex of the left and right postcentral gyrus, which is called the primary somatic sensory cortex. Here, this patch of cortex on the left side, notice they do not put it on the right side. This would be Wernicke's area, the sensory language area. Wernicke's area is active whenever we're understanding language expressed in any form, understanding spoken language, reading written language, interpreting sign language. We use Wernicke's area. So it partially overlaps the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe on the left side. That's Broca's area there in blue, also left side. So that's on the frontal lobe, left frontal lobe. And that patch of cortex is called the motor language area. We use Broca's when expressing language in any form, speaking, writing, doing sign language, etc. We use Broca's area. And this cortex here on the left temporal lobe should also be, and is also shown on the right temporal lobe. So the left side only cortex regions are Wernicke's and Broca's. So this would be auditory cortex right here. The more anterior part of the cortex would be the primary auditory cortex for hearing sound, and more posteriorly we have the auditory association cortex for learning one sound from another, being able to interpret one sound versus another, so on, and that's on both sides. Two occipital two occipital lobes. This would be the primary visual cortex of the left occipital lobe, primary visual cortex of the right occipital lobe. So this is involved in being able to see anything, but the rest of the surrounding occipital lobe cortex would be the visual association area, being able to differentiate between one object and another based on how it looks. Learning to tell one thing from another based on how it looks, and also memory, visual memory, involved in the visual association area of the two occipital lobes. Transverse fissure running in between the two cerebral hemispheres and the cerebellum. Longitudinal fissure separating the two cerebral hemispheres. So we have the left and right cerebellar hemisphere here. All these ridges known as the folia. You can see the vermis in there. See that the structure right there in the midline? That depression in there. So the vermis is right in there. The vermis is a commissure that connects the two cerebellar hemispheres together. Let's see. This inferior view, left and right olfactory bulb, left and right olfactory tract. That little nub right there is the left optic nerve. That little nub there is the right optic nerve. And notice how they form an X? The nerves from the two upper bars of the X, the tracts down here, down there, form the two lower bars of the X. So right optic nerve and tract. Left, I beg your pardon, left optic nerve and tract, right optic nerve and tract. In the center of the X is the optic chiasm. Pituitary gland, and they make no effort to differentiate between anterior and posterior. Pons, right there. medulla oblongata here, and then that will give way to the spinal cord. So here we're right at the foramen magnum at this point here.
I have a question.
Sure.
Where will we differentiate between the olfactory tract and the olfactory nerve?
Well, the nerve actually begins before, the beginning of the nerve isn't even on here. The nerve actually begins, you remember from the skull,
Cribriform plate.
right about here is where you would have the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. Okay?
Okay.
Right there. So the two olfactory bulbs sit on top of they're on the superior surface of the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. The actual axons that begin in the nasoepithelium, they go through the foramina of the cribriform plate and then form the two olfactory bulbs. So the actual axons of the olfactory nerves begin inferior to the cribriform plate and go through those foramina and then collect in the bulbs, which are pressed right on top, right on the superior surface of the cribriform plate. Okay, so essentially, bulbs will be considered the end of the olfactory nerves, and then we go on to the actual tracts, considered to be part of the CNS rather than the PNS.
Got it.
Okay?
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's see, where these come apart. So again, we see the medulla oblongata, the pons, that's the right cerebral peduncle. Kind of looks like a bird's head in profile there, the right cerebral peduncle. You see these two little bulges? That lower bulge is the right inferior colliculus. That upper bulge is the right superior colliculus. You've got the other, actually the other two aren't quite as distinct. So there are four total bulges, four colliculi, making a structure called the corpora quadrigemina, the four twin bodies. That's the Latin translation, the four twin bodies. So the four colliculi, there would be a right and the left superior colliculus, there would be a right and the left inferior colliculus. The four colliculi make up the corpora quadrigemina of the midbrain. So the two cerebral peduncles, the right and the left cerebral peduncle, also part of the midbrain. And what groove goes through the midbrain? This groove right there, that's the cerebral aqueduct, right on the midline. Cerebral aqueduct goes right through the midline, separating the more anterior cerebral peduncles from the more posterior corpora quadrigemina. And what flows through the cerebral aqueduct? Cerebrospinal fluid, exactly. All right. Let's see.
Question.
Oh, question, yeah.
So the part that looks like a bird's profile?
Yeah, that's the cerebral peduncle of the midbrain.
Of the midbrain,
Yes.
okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's the vermis again, so mid-sagittally section cerebellum. So there's the right cerebellar hemisphere with its folia, its folds or ridges. So the vermis is the commissure right on the midline that connects the two cerebellar hemispheres. And you can see all these little branches inside. These are white matter tracts collectively called the arbor vitae, the tree of life. And yeah, these white matter tracts within the vermis of the cerebellum. The cerebellum is a major controller of skeletal muscle movement. Posture, I've got terrible posture, I know that. In fact, it's one of the exercises I was told to do. We're supposed to be doing latissimus dorsi exercises every day, and I don't. So in any event, we have a little space in there. That's the fourth ventricle. There would be a choroid plexus in there because each ventricle has a choroid plexus for the synthesis of cerebrospinal fluid. Each choroid plexus converts blood plasma into CSF. All right. So.
Where's the fourth ventricle again? Sorry.
Pardon?
This is the fourth ventricle.
See this little V-shaped space? See that V-shaped space in there? So all of that, actually, that's all fourth ventricle. Up to and in here. But then when we get into the midbrain, it's now the cerebral aqueduct. So fourth ventricle would be essentially right here. But it's got a little V-shaped notch. That's the place to look for, the fourth ventricle. We come up cerebral aqueduct. Then we go into the shallow space in here, above the cerebral aqueduct. That's the third ventricle, or the right side of the third ventricle that we see in here. That little dot you see is the intermediate mass of the thalamus, also called the interthalamic adhesion. That's another commissure connecting the two sides of the thalamus. Just as the vermis is a commissure connecting the two cerebellar hemispheres, the intermediate mass of the thalamus, or interthalamic adhesion, is a smaller commissure connecting the two sides of the thalamus. Let's see. Down in here is hypothalamus. Right there's hypothalamus. That little bulge is the right mammillary body, which is a continuation, an inferior continuation of the hypothalamus. That little white structure there, not the pituitary gland, that little white structure there, that's the optic chiasm. Remember, it's the center of the X. It's the middle of the X. So the optic nerves meet in the midline, then become the optic tracts. So the optic chiasm is the middle of the X. So posterior, the optic chiasm, you see a little white stalk. That's the infundibulum, which is also an inferior continuation of the hypothalamus. The infundibulum ends or with the posterior pituitary. So hypothalamus is always pointed to here on figures in books and online, but the hypothalamus also includes the two mammillary bodies, here's the right one, and the infundibulum and the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is a true gland. The posterior pituitary is brain, is hypothalamus. Okay? This is the right side of the medial view of the right side of the corpus callosum, the biggest commissure of them all. Corpus callosum connects the two cerebral hemispheres together. Well, there are three commissures that connect two cerebral hemispheres. This is the largest of the three. In fact, it's the largest commissure in the entire body.
Question.
Sure.
So the fornix is
Here's
below that.
the right
inferior.
fornix.
Right. And then the
And there's the left fornix, the white curve. So there's the other side of the corpus callosum. There's the left fornix. And your question about it is what?
it was where would you differentiate between the epithalamus?
That's a very good question. This pink structure on here is the epithalamus. Actually, that's supposed to be the choroid plexus.
Choroid plexus.
Yeah, that pink thing is supposed to be the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. Epithalamus, this model was actually pretty sucky when it comes to epithalamus. So you would have the pineal body or pineal gland back here. So actually, and so you can see it continuing with a little white ridge.
Yes.
That would be the habenula. So the
Habenula.
habenula and the
Pineal
pineal together are the epithalamus of the diencephalon. Epithalamus of diencephalon, thalamus of diencephalon, hypothalamus of diencephalon. So the third ventricle is that CSF-filled space in the center of the diencephalon. Okay. Anything else? That's pretty much everything I could think of that I did assign on here.
Except
Yeah,
pollution.
sure, we'll do that, yeah. How about the Klingon starship? Want to bring that over?